Welcome in to another episode of my Dynasty Fantasy Football YouTube. Today I'm looking at some Dynasty sells. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's go. So, number one, George Pickens. Now, it's rare that I ever would say this about a player because a lot of the reasons I want to sell Pickens are kind of anecdotal, but something doesn't feel right with Pickens. At some point, there are a lot of excuses, and those have to stop, and he needs to produce, which he has not done. So, this year, 26 catches, 363 yards, 44 targets, 4.3 catches, and 60.5 yards per game. It's not bad, but it's not wide receiver one numbers. You would think that a player with no other receiving competition would do a lot better than that. Over the last two games, he's dealt with a reduction in playing time, complained about his targets. How well is this going to go? In Pittsburgh, it probably won't go very well. He has just 6 catches for 77 yards over the previous two games. Really has not been as involved in the game plan. Now, why do I have George Pickens as a dynasty sell? Some might blame Justin Fields for Pickens' lack of production, but DJ Moore was very good as the sole wide receiver for Fields last year. Moore had 96 catches, 1,364 yards, 8 touchdowns on 136 targets, 5.6 catches, and 80.2 yards a game. So it's at least abundantly clear that Pickens is nowhere near as good as DJ Moore. Nowhere near. And DJ Moore is a great wide receiver, but he's not one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. He's not a superstar. It's a good, really, really good player. But Pickens is not even that good. So what does that mean Pickens is? I think Pickens was in the right role last year when he was the kind of complementary player to Deontay Johnson as the more standard wide receiver one. The Steelers have tried to basically add every available wide receiver. They wanted Brandon Ayuk all offseason and failed. They were not getting Amari Cooper in the division. I think they would have liked to do that. Davante Adams forced his way to the Jets. We know the Steelers were interested in Davante Adams. I just feel like this is a unique situation in that the Steelers, it's one thing not to have good wide receivers on the team, but it's another thing to have Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin as starters in a wide receiver room. Essentially, with Roman Wilson being nowhere to be found, George Pickens is the only player on this team who's even NFL caliber, that is rare. That is not typical. That is not normal. Now, Pickens has a 8.9% target share and 29.1% target rate. 7th and 14th among wide receivers. These are good numbers. But in this case, I believe there's someone misleading. His raw targets are not actually that good. And his target share is of an absolutely tiny passing pie. The Steelers are not passing because they have no one to throw to. I think this is a fake statistic, as in it's real, but I don't think it's telling you what people think it's telling you. I am not interested in George Pickens. I don't like him. And I think you can get a very good return to sell George Pickens because there are some people on Twitter who say, oh, target share. Woo. Yes, target share is an indicator. It's not the only indicator. In this case, the other indicators are saying, get rid of George Pickens now while you still can. Apparently, according to Dynasty data, you could sell George Pickens in 25 third for Brian Thomas. I mean, I would do that instantly. You could sell George Pickens in 2.26 seconds for Baker Mayfield in a super flex. I mean, Baker Mayfield is a solid superflex asset. We're talking about a franchise quarterback now. These other things are not a franchise quarterback. So I would easily do this to get Baker Mayfield. And then the easy one, sell George Pickens for 25 first. George Pickens is never going to be worth more than a 25 first. So I would do this deal without a second thought. Now, my second player, James Cook. I don't want to say I dislike him. In fact, I actually think Cook is a good running back. And he'll continue to have a nice NFL career. But having a nice NFL career isn't enough to be a high-value dynasty running back. You can't just have a nice NFL career. You have to be elite. And he's, well, not. This year, 70 carries, 309 yards, 4 touchdowns, 4.4 yards a carry, and 11 catches, 123 yards, and a touchdown. Basically, he's kind of duplicating his 2023 performance. Slightly fewer receptions per game, less yards per carry, but he's scoring rushing touchdowns. But overall, from a volume perspective, very, very similar role to last year. Now, why do I have Cook as a dynasty sell? A lack of a workhorse role, Ray Davis's breakout, and touchdown regression going backwards from where it's been so far this year. Cook just doesn't get all the snaps. He's played between 47 and 61% of snaps in every game. He's lost time to Ty Johnson and then Ray Davis at times. It's really, really hard. How can you be a high value dynasty running back on that sort of playing time? You have to be elite efficient or get a ridiculous role in the passing game. And Cook is neither of those things. Now, we know Ray Davis broke out. I was actually at this game. 20 carries, 97 yards, and 3 catches, 55 yards in week 6 in their win over the Jets. Davis played a 58% snap share, similar to Cook's role. Basically, Davis just played Cook's role. It's scary, though, that Ray Davis looked just as good as James Cook. Davis also received carries in the red zone, even though he didn't score. If Davis gets any of that work going forward, it will hurt Cook. Now, it's nice that Cook has scored 4 rushing touchdowns this year. However, he's also scored 4 rushing touchdowns on 326 carries previously in his career. I don't think Cook has become better in the red zone. I don't think anything has changed. I do think he's gotten a bit lucky this year. We cannot expect this current touchdown rate to proceed moving forward on a team with Josh Allen. That's not going to happen. I think the touchdown truth, if I had to pick, is it closer to the 4 rushing touchdowns on 70 carries or the 4 rushing touchdowns on 326? I think it's closer to the 4 rushing touchdowns on 326 carries. I think that was a little harsh, but 4 rushing touchdowns on 70 carries is not going to continue for James Cook. That's just not possible on a team with Josh Allen. Now, selling James Cook. Cook is still valued, I think, as a high-value dynasty running back, but he's really just a committee back on a great offense. Of course, I'd sell James Cook for a 25 first. Generally, these types of running backs, who are, we know they're not elite. Generally, I'd take a 25 first for any of them. I also saw a deal sell James Cook for George Kittle in 25 second and tight end premium. I'd rather have the Kittle side there. I think you're getting more value. And then this last one, which I don't know, sell James Cook for Rashee Rice in the 25 first. That seems fake to me, but it was in there. It was in the Dynasty Trade database. I guess you just have to say you never know what might happen if you ask. So explore the possibility of ridiculous trades like this one in your league. You never know when someone will do something silly. If you like my YouTube content, you should sign up for the Patreon. You get my rankings, access to the Discord, and the ability to ask in advance questions for the YouTube videos. Tiers begin at just $6 a month and include all of that. If you want to know more about the Patreon, check out both of my Why You Should Join the Patreon videos on the channel. They're on the home page of my YouTube channel. I really appreciate everyone who signed up and any new patrons who joined. And I just want to say there have been a lot of new signups recently. So I would love it if we could keep that momentum going. Click the link in the top right corner, patreon.com/fantasyadvice, where you can sign up for the Patreon. All of my Q&A advice will take place on there. It will not take place on Twitter. It will not take place in the YouTube comments. That will not change. So if you want my advice about your dynasty teams, the Patreon is the way to go. With that said, let's get into our next player. So our final sell for today is DeAndre Swift, who's had a mixed performance this year. Of course, though, dynasty managers focus on what's happened most recently, and Swift is coming off 3 great games. So now is a great moment to capitalize on that value. This year's stats: 91 carries, 325 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3.6 yards a carry, and 19 catches for 193 yards. Now, those are fine numbers, nothing overly special across a 6-game sample size. But let's split it up. The first 3 games, 37 carries, 68 yards, and 6 catches, 46 yards. Now, that looks like one of the worst running backs in the league. Last 3 games, 54 carries, 257 yards, and 3 touchdowns, and 13 catches for 147 yards. Obviously, neither of these 2 groups of statistics, or these 2 groups of 3 games, represent Swift's true value. If you reverse them, Swift would be worthless now if the first 3 games were his last 3 and vice versa. We know that Swift is not a consistently great running back. We know that. It's been long enough in his career to know that. We also know he's not as horrible as the first 3 games showed. He's not that bad. So he's somewhere in between those 2 things. The yearly statistics are probably about right. Now, of course, dynasty managers have short memories. They think, well, Swift is a running back 1 rest of season. I really don't think that is the case at all. Now, Swift signed a 3-year, $24 million contract with $15.3 million guaranteed this offseason. Basically, it's a 2-year deal with all the money this year and 2025 guaranteed, and the 2026 year is basically a team option with no money guaranteed. But this contract will not stop the Bears from selecting another running back in the 2025 NFL draft. We see this type of thing all the time. Just because you have an incumbent running back who's good or okay does not stop you from adding at that position. The Bears also have an extra 2nd-round pick from the Panthers, which will allow them to maybe do a luxury pick on a running back they wouldn't otherwise in a loaded 2025 running back class. Now, Roschon Johnson has not been good. He's not been very good. 30 carries for 89 yards and 3 touchdowns, 6 catches for 57 yards. He's fine. He's a backup. He's not good, though. Khalil Herbert is a free agent. He will not be back. They don't use him at all. He's basically finished. I'm surprised he wasn't even traded if the Bears just hate him that much. The Bears will not hesitate to improve their team with a rookie quarterback. They already have a lot of receivers. They have Cole Kmet locked up at tight ends. So one of the ways they could do that is improving the running back position with a draft pick, upgrading over Roschon Johnson. So Swift is not a lock to see the same situation in 2025 that he's seeing right now. He's not good enough to prevent the Bears from taking a day 2 running back if they feel that is the best thing for their team. Swift is not on that level to prevent that from happening. So with that being said, to sell DeAndre Swift, saw a couple of trades. Sell DeAndre Swift and Amari Cooper is good timing for Brandon Ayuk. I would take Brandon Ayuk there. The classic DeAndre Swift for 25 first. I mean, DeAndre Swift will never be worth a 25 first ever again. So I would happily take a 25 first for Swift in any situation. And then Ladd McConkey, I mean, it's been a buy for me. Sell DeAndre Swift for Ladd McConkey in 27 second. Obviously, 27 second isn't that important, but it's still second, even if it's a while away. And Ladd McConkey is a strong buy for me. So I would be happy to do this. The value's by far on the McConkey side. Now, I usually don't cover too much NFL news, but there are 2 really big stories, so I'm going to cover both of them. Number 1, Davante Adams traded to the Jets. The Raiders traded Adams to the Jets for 25 third that can become a 25 second if Adams is an all-pro or the Jets make the AFC Championship. So basically, it's a 25 third. Seems like a reasonable price for Adams. The Jets restructured Adams' contract for this year, so he could be there for 2025 and beyond, but the cap hits are insanely high with almost no dead cap. The 2 sides would probably need to agree to a restructure to keep Adams there beyond 2024, which I assume will only happen if Rodgers remains as the quarterback. Now, how does this affect the players there? So Garrett Wilson currently leads the NFL in targets. He has 41 catches for 399 yards, 3 touchdowns on 67 targets in 6 games. That's insane. More than 10 targets a game. More than 11, actually. 6.8 catches and 66.5 yards a game. 6.8 catches a game is wild. This has been Wilson's best year in terms of targets, yards, touchdowns. So far, he's been an elite volume wide receiver. So for me, Wilson is a dynasty buy or hold, not a sell. Players with elite volume like Wilson don't usually become irrelevant when other players are added. I'd expect a downtick in Wilson's volume, but he's not just going to vanish because Adams is there. I've heard that being said. That's crazy to me. As for Adams, he's a hard sell. I get the narrative, but almost 32-year-old wide receivers changing teams are never a dynasty buy. Adams has given you one last dynasty sell window. I would highly suggest putting Adams on the block if you still have him and seeing what you get. You'll probably get someone excited. I'd want to sell before I see it. So this would be a really good opportunity to move on from Davante Adams. Next story, Amari Cooper traded to the Bills. The Browns sent Cooper in a 25-6 to the Bills for 25 third and 26-7th. So Cooper has no base salary this year. It's the final year of his deal. The Bills didn't announce any extension with him. So for now, this is a rental 1-year experiment. Cooper so far, 24 catches, 250 yards, 2 touchdowns on 53 targets, 4 catches and 41.7 yards a game. I think the problem was Deshaun Watson. The target volume was still there for Cooper. The Bills have no other weapons that were performing. Cooper will be the top receiving option in this offense immediately. The Bills have 172 carries versus 159 passing attempts, making them one of the most run-heavy offenses in the league. They're 6th in run play percentage at 52%. Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakir, and Keon Coleman will all be hurt by this move. Kincaid and Shakir, I think, will remain involved, but will be even more boom bust than before. Coleman, you can cut him in redraft leagues, and you're not going to be able to play him. I'm not really buying low on any of these players. I think it's very clear that none of them can handle being the top weapon in an NFL offense. I'm not even sure any of them can be a true number 2 weapon. Maybe they can all combine to be a number 2 weapon behind Amari Cooper, but we're not going to want that for fantasy. I'm a little skeptical about that for Dynasty, so I'm not really looking into this for a buy low, if I'm being honest with you. Unlike Adams, Cooper's more of a hold. I mean, we did see the selling of him in the Swift deal, so I would love to do that, but I don't think there's the same magical value with Cooper that I've heard about with Adams, with the Rodgers connection. Of course, I'd explore putting Cooper on the block, but I'm not sure you'd get as much of a return as you'd like. Now, I have one Patreon question, so we'll jump into that and then close out the show. Josh Downs and Tank Dell, sell now. Well, those are 2 players where the value varies wildly. I fully believe that Downs and Dell are good players, but they're not alpha wide receivers. They're not elite fantasy assets. So their value is somewhat dependent on situation. For Downs, as long as Anthony Richardson is the starter, I don't even think Downs is going to be a wide receiver 2. I mean, Michael Pittman were injured maybe, but it's going to be hard to ever even start Downs with Anthony Richardson as the starter. It's more than a mid wide receiver 3. So it's tough for Downs. I mean, for Dell, we know he'll never, ever pass Nico Collins in the pecking order. He'll be the wide receiver 2 on that team at best. If it were just him and Collins, maybe Dell could be a fantasy wide receiver 2. With Diggs there, he's not going to be more than a volatile wide receiver 3. I'm comfortable selling both. For Dell, I'd probably still need a first, at least. For Downs, tough to sell. Downs is probably more of a hold than a sell. And we've talked about this in the Patreon Discord. I've talked about the returns I would want for Downs and Dell. So it's just another reason to sign up for the Patreon so you can get more detail about my specific moves I would do with players like this. Now, if you liked the video, make sure to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. As always, the best way to support the channel is to subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notifications bell so you can be notified about all my exciting content as it drops. Of course, if you want my best fantasy football advice, it's available on the Patreon. Dynasty starts at redraft and more. You can get it up there, patreon.com/fantasy advice. Click on the link. And every sign up helps support my independent content. But once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later.